Let's talk about humility. It's considered a good thing. I'm a fan, right? It implies being humble, to not drawing excessive attention to oneself or your accomplishments, to being a little self-effacing and being restrained in how you talk about yourself. Now, the dictionary definition is not as kind to the concept of humility as I am. Now, some definitions call it a freedom from pride and arrogance. That's kind of good. But other definitions hold that it is someone putting a low value to one's importance, which I don't think is great. Now, humility is associated with some good stuff. People higher in humility have better relationships. They're more flexible, they're more open, there's less ego. It's sort of an opposite of narcissism trait, and it is often associated with agreeableness. Now, many survivors of narcissistic relationships, in narcissistic parents or families, and narcissistic intimate relationships, narcissistic workplaces, are humble. And it's a bit of a chicken-egg issue, because humility is part of this larger personality trait of agreeableness, largely. Well, we know that agreeable people do tend to get stuck in narcissistic relationships. It doesn't really make sense that a narcissistic relationship would make a person more humble, and humility is considered a pretty stable trait. So at least in adult relationships, people bring that humility into the relationship in most cases. Now, humility also has a little bit of a temperament issue built into it. Some kids are more humble. You've seen this if you've ever observed kids. And it's likely all part and parcel of childhood agreeableness. But the issue is how this thing called humility is affected by and shaped by narcissistic relationships. Listen, it's hard to figure out first where humility ends and self-protection and self-silencing begins for children who grow up with narcissistic parents. Is humility something that's born out of the fawn response, or is it who the child is? Is it the fear of being too good and then being competitive with the narcissistic parent that can be the source of the humility for the child? In some narcissistic families, being seen too much is risky, so the humility can also be a way to stay small. Sadly, some of the self-talk that has to evolve for a child in a narcissistic family system is also a contributor to something that looks like humility. Never speaking too highly of oneself and even silencing one's own accomplishments. If it is safety, it may look like humility, but be serving a very different function. To be humble is to survive in one of these systems, frankly. Now, second, in adult relationships, similar themes emerge. In almost every narcissistic relationship, if you even speak of any accomplishment or success, you are bragging, or you are arrogant, or you are narcissistic. Your wings are kind of pulled off feather by feather. Now, if you are naturally humble, you may be very soft in how you talk about any good stuff that happens to you, but even that will be shut down. A narcissistic relationship, rather sadly, sort of trains us to be more humble. But again, if it is a safety response, we are less likely to think of it as a personality style, because it is a way to stay safe in the relationship. Be small, and then you get to be attached. Most survivors I meet will be very, very careful and quiet and tentative about sharing their accomplishments. They might say like, oh, I did something interesting, it's not a big deal. Or they might leave out that they won a big honor, or that they have an amazing skill, or anything that is special or compelling or interesting. They may even look down and say, oh, it's not that big a deal. When I meet lots of survivors at one time, for example, at a virtual or a live event, I'm struck by how careful people are about sharing anything good about themselves. And they will often launch into lots of disclaimers. Okay, I don't want this to sound like bragging, like, oh, I don't want to sound narcissistic, but I want to tell you, whatever it is. These are often people I observe doing very kind things for other people and not making it into a big, look at me moment or expect some kind of aggrandizement. It feels as though it is in their nature, and simultaneously, it feels quite protective. This idea of, I want to share something, but it's too risky to be too big. Not everyone in a narcissistic relationship necessarily comes tumbling in humble. Some folks come into these relationships assured and do talk about what they're doing and accomplishments and achievements in an unapologetic way. Well, that is going to get shut down very quickly in a narcissistic relationship. What can happen over time is not the development of humility, but rather the shutting down of the self. And there is a difference. Maybe the tipping point between these traits does just come down to safety and fear. Listen, many humble people find themselves stuck in narcissistic relationships. And in fact, the humility may mean the relationship keeps going for a while. You don't brag, they do, and it's a sad, asymmetric, but strangely symbiotic balance. Humble or not, everyone gets shut down and silenced in a narcissistic relationship. And when I look at survivors, what I most often see is the nuanced blend of humility and the fallout of being shut down. Healing means that you hold on to the humility, but can lean into the cool, neat, important things you do without fear. Humility means that you may not be braggy or talk about your selfie because it's not who you are. The fallout of narcissistic abuse means that you aren't braggy because you were told that you were somehow bad for sharing of yourself. And so you share less and less. There is a difference. Ultimately, most survivors silence themselves in these relationships, and healing means finding that voice again. That seeming humility we so often observe in all of you as survivors is often a hybrid of your long-standing humility and the many, many ways we learn to be small and silent to keep ourselves safe. And nothing makes me happier than when a person who has been going through one of these relationships rolls up and says with pride in their eyes, look at what I did. Because when you can take the humility and the self-silencing of survivorship and start to throw a few drops of pride into there, that's the win. And I believe all of us can get there. So keep those good parts of humility, but also know that what you do matters. Thanks again.